I'm Teresa Coraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about Russell Brand's Under the Skin podcast 199, Censorship and Consciousness with Bret Weinstein. My perspective will be the demonization and demonetization of disinformation, and there are air quotes around that last word. I'll be going from etymology to Bible scholarship to rhetorical fallacies to ultimate reality, which seems to be where Russell and I often end up. And so, buckle in. Before I get started, I looked up Bret on Wikipedia and noticed that the college that he graduated from was the same one where I went to for my graduate work, the University of California, Santa Cruz. Go Banana Slugs. I figured any school that had the banana slug as its mascot could not take itself too seriously. I also wanted a school that didn't have fraternities or sororities. Now, Bret may have been similarly motivated because at his last college, he had gotten into an altercation with his fraternity over the sexual harassment of strippers. I have friends who've been strippers in their lives, and I think that women taking power from their own sexuality is a strong thing and a good thing, and it does not mean that they've given up any rights, especially their right to body sovereignty. And so on their behalf and on behalf of all women, I want to thank Bret for making that very unpopular stand that seems to have cost him a lot in terms of his friendships, his fraternity, his college, but I'm glad that we in Santa Cruz ended up getting the benefit of him coming here. So sovereignty and body sovereignty is still an issue that I think Bret is standing up for. He's standing up for the right of people to determine their own health, to determine what nutrition and medicines they put into their bodies, and also what information they put into their minds. The government these days especially seem to think that we're all children, that we are gullible, that we have to be told what it is that we can consume, whether that's physically or whether that's mentally. And there's no logic that we can point to say, no, we actually are adults, we actually do know how to think, and we know how to determine whether something is a lie or whether something is truthful, whether there is science behind it, whether there are facts, or whether something is just a fiction. And so we need to be reclaiming that, and I think that Bret is doing a wonderful thing by helping us do that at his own expense. So let's get started with etymology. Bret calls himself a reluctant radical, and I'm hoping to get an etymological scoop on Russell with this because I've started his podcast at the beginning and at the end, and I'm working my way towards the middle. So in an early episode, I hear him learn the meaning of the word deracinate, which was new to me also, as taking something out from its roots. And then in later episodes, I hear him use it 4 different times. So I think his 3rd grade teacher would be really proud. Use a word 4 times in a sentence, and it is yours forever. Another word that is related to that is radical, that the word radical means to get to the roots of an issue. And so I think that's something that's very important to both him and to me. And he's probably mentioned the meaning of it in another podcast that I haven't heard yet, but whatever. So I am also looking at being a reluctant radical, maybe an enthusiastic radical. And Bret calls himself pathologically analytical. Just yesterday, I learned that the term analytical means to take something apart, to take it into its separate elements. I am also pathologically analytical, but I think there should be another term that is to put something together, to put it into its relationships with things. We already have the word contextualize, but that's kind of like an egg in a nest. It's just putting something into what surrounds it. So something like connectivize, that we connectualize, that if we can take something and look at how it connects to all other concepts, that then I think that's a part of being analytical. So we'll get back to that later. Now I want to look at the word demonize. Where does demonize come from? So the concept of the demon or of Satan came up in the Gospels. It originated in the concept of the Gospels. And one of my favorite Bible historians is Elaine Pagels, who wrote the book, The Origin of Satan. She also wrote about the Gnostic Gospels, which are fascinating. In this, she describes the historical context of the Gospels, which was that the Judeans were rebelling against the Roman Empire. And they had won. For 3 years, the Zealots had kicked the Roman Empire out of Jerusalem. They had occupied the temple. And so the Gospels refer to different things that happened during that time. And they refer to them kind of obliquely, but clearly they were written after the Judeans had taken over the temple. But which side were they on? In this book, what she says is that the demons or Satan was the intimate enemy. It was the enemy within. It was the insurgents. Because after the empire had won again, they became the ones who were the troublemakers. They also get referred to as robbers, as thieves. And so the demon is the enemy that the one who is in your midst, the one who looks like you, but who has this power that comes from somewhere else that should be distrusted. So let's look at how demonetization is also tied to that history, because the way that the Judeans were finally defeated is that the Roman Empire, the army, surrounded Jerusalem and put it under siege. And so essentially what they did was demonetize it. They made it so that no food could get in. They couldn't trade with anything. They couldn't get goods. They couldn't communicate. And so that kind of siege is the power that the empire has over us now. As a matter of fact, we're looking at going into possibly another time when each of us can be put under siege in our own homes, that we can be held hostage, where the power of everything to come to us is under their control. So I think that Bret is doing very interesting things in terms of bringing attention to that and looking at what's happening in that realm. Let's look at rhetorical fallacies. When the empire looks at our inability to think clearly, we have a model for debate. It goes back to ancient Greece. They had turned debate into an art form. And one of the things I love about it is that the audience participated in the debate, because anytime that someone used a trick, something that was a rhetorical device that was manipulative, that was trying to win an argument without having the facts and the logic behind them, what someone in the audience could do was say, ad hominem attack. They could name whatever the fallacy was, or they could say, define your terms. And the person then had to say, here's what I mean by this word that I'm using. And so that kept the debate about the actual issues so that you couldn't win unfairly. Right now, we have rhetorical fallacies being used left and right. That the term conspiracy theorist is an ad hominem attack. It is something that attacks the character of the person and not the issues. It makes it where that person is no longer credible without ever looking at what it is that their argument is about. It deflects all that attention away from the facts and away from the logic and towards the person. I think that it is, I don't even think ironic is the word for it. It is a travesty that now Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is being called a conspiracy theorist, when the term, as you guys I'm sure already know, was created by the CIA in response to people who were questioning the official story of JFK's assassination. And so you have these actual assassinations that happened, and now you have this character assassination that's happening, and that also you have a sitting president who's essentially said, if your loved one was not vaccinated and you're either afraid for them now or terrible things have already happened, here's the people that you have to blame. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is one of the people who are at the top of that list. That is essentially calling for other people to commit violence, the way that we once accused Trump of doing. It's saying we're all in this state that is very fragile. So now let's use that. Let's take those people and let's turn them against someone who we've identified as the demons, as the Satans, as the forces of evil. One of the positive aspects of this, though, for me personally, is that it's made it really clear who I want to listen to. That if someone isn't being censored these days, if they are not putting themselves at risk for their freedom, like Edward Snowden, or their monetization, or like Glenn Greenwald, or professionally, academically, I'm not sure there's any reason to listen to that person. I have 6 different rules that I look at for critical thinking, and they tell me whether I should be giving someone credibility and looking closely at what they're saying, or whether I should be looking skeptically at what they're saying. And that first rule is, do they benefit from what they're said, or are they putting themselves at risk? And that is something that's been coming in very handy as a first level. And then I look at whether someone's using unfair tactics. And so if they're using name calling, insults, hyperbole, things like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, or the reverse of the friend of my enemy is my enemy, then those tricks cause me to say, no, their argument can't stand on its own. And that's why they're resorting to those kinds of things. If they're keeping me from being able to look at the information by diverting me into all kinds of different things, like straw man argument, or guilt by association, changing the discussion, those are all things that I look at as signs of a weak argument. So now let's look at ultimate reality. At some point, Bret talks about panpsychism, Russell's panpsychism, which is a new word to me. I think what he's talking about with that is this idea that we are one mind, and that consciousness precedes matter, or possibly is what matter is contained in. So he says to Russell, that's fine for you. I think anything you can do to get through the day that gives you that reassurance, if you want to tell yourself that little fairy tale, you just go right ahead. And I think that's a little patronizing. And I also think that it is something that we who are pathologically analytical need to look at more closely. The most important question in the world is, does the world exist in our minds, or do our minds exist in the world? And in particular, do our minds exist in our bodies, which then exist and are subject to the world, or do our bodies exist in our minds just like the world? The reason that this is such a critical question is because, going back to Bible history and what was going on when the Zealots and Judea were fighting against the Roman Empire, the tool that the empire has that will enable them to always win is the power to inflict pain. Pain is stronger than death, which is why torture works. If someone could choose death over pain, they would. And so if the empire can inflict pain not only directly but indirectly by putting us under siege, making us entirely dependent on them, dependent on money that they create, and then can withhold it and thereby make us unable to have the things in which we need to live, in which we need to feed the soft, hungry body, then they will always win. If, however, the world exists in our mind, that may not be true at all. And I think, from research that I've done into that era, I think the Zealots were onto something that we have forgotten today. I think they actually knew a truth that we've lost sight of, that's been obscured, and I think in particular it's been obscured by the Bible. I think the Bible turned everything inside out and turned the heroes of the day into the demons and turned the traitors of the day into the heroes, which I will get into another time. But from the evidence of that time, the Zealots were fearless. They were absolutely unafraid of pain, and that every time there was a coliseum full of people and they were being tortured, they laughed at it, and that made it so that the insurgency was spreading like wildfire throughout the colonies of the Roman Empire. That was why it had to be killed with ideas, with an idea, because it could not be killed through fear, through the infliction of pain, through death. And so I think this is something that we need to take seriously, and we need to be absolutely rigorous in looking at the evidence. When Bret looks at science and all the things that science can prove, if the world exists in our mind, then all those rules that the world is working by also exist in our mind. You can't disprove that as a theory by looking at the rules, because if we're making the one up, we're making it all up. So if you can't disprove something, someone out there should be considering them as a possibility. I think this is particularly important today because we need each other. And when I look at Russell and his focus on meditation, what I look at meditation bringing to me is that connection to other people that they can't take away. I feel myself to be in communion with all of you. Every time I meditate, there is a way of being held in the knowledge of other people who are having the courage to look at the truth and who are going through the loneliness of that. Because I don't know about you, but I've found that this is a time to really not get into arguments. I don't engage on a lot of these issues because I think people all need to kind of come to their own conclusions. And I'm very happy that people like Bret are having the courage to be able to come out with these things publicly. For the rest of us, I think it's a time to really take care of ourselves. When we were in the last pandemic, if we can call it that, we were focusing on self-care. We were saying, okay, all I have to do is get through this. I just need to survive. I don't think we should let go of that concept. We still need to be taking care of ourselves, being nice to ourselves, being nice to each other. And I think we need to focus on doing things to make ourselves happy and to feel loved and to feel love for other people. And so if the world exists in our mind, the only thing that's real is love. The only thing that's real are our relationships, our loving relationships with each other. And I think that that's a possibility that we should all be considering. And I want to thank you, Bret. This has been a wonderful thing to be able to think about and to be able to bring that gratitude to you. If you're intrigued and would like to go deeper into these ideas, here's another video on a related theme. And if you'd like to delve into this entire area, here's a playlist. Thank you, and I would love it if you would subscribe.